Welcome, dear students, to our English class of Standard 9th. Today we will be doing the third lesson of Unit 4, Intellectual Rubbish. This piece is a part of Bertrand Russell's essay, An Outline to Intellectual Rubbish. As a founding figure of the analytic movement in philosophy, Bertrand Russell helped to transform the substance, character, and style of philosophy in the English-speaking world. He was also one of the greatest logicians of the 20th century. As an outspoken social reformer, he campaigned effectively against unjust and irrational impediments to human freedom and happiness. Intellectual rubbish. To avoid the various foolish opinions to which mankind are prone, no superhuman genius is required. A few simple rules will keep you not from all error, but from simple error. Although it is often said that man is a rational animal, Russell finds hardly any evidence of human rationality in the world. Russell finds cruelty, persecution, and superstition increasing by leaps and bounds. Russell gives us an abundance of concrete examples to prove his thesis in this essay. He uses the phrase intellectual rubbish to describe all false beliefs, baseless opinions, superstitions of various kinds, and a general obscurantist attitude. All this intellectual rubbish is the consequence of an irrational view of things. People follow certain beliefs, ideas, and customs without inquiring into their validity. In actual fact, many of these beliefs and customs lead to evil and suffering in the world. If the matter is the one that can be settled by observation, make the observation yourself. Aristotle could have avoided the mistake of thinking that women have fewer teeth than men by the simple device of asking Mrs. Aristotle to keep her mouth open while he counted. He did not do so because he thought he knew. Thinking that you know when in fact you don't is a fatal mistake to which we are all prone. I believe myself that hedgehogs eat black beetles because I have been told that they do. But if I were writing a book on the habits of hedgehogs, I should not commit myself until I had seen one enjoying this unappetizing diet. Aristotle, however, was less cautious. Russell cites the example of Aristotle, who declared that women had fewer teeth than men. Russell says that if Aristotle had asked Mrs. Aristotle to keep her mouth open while he finished counting, he would have saved himself from making a very serious mistake. He did not do so because he thought he knew. This, according to Russell, is the greatest mistake. He further illustrates the situation, stating his own beliefs about hedgehogs and beliefs of the ancient and medieval authors about unicorns and salamanders. Now, ancient and medieval writers knew all about unicorns and salamanders. Not one of them thought it necessary to avoid dogmatic statements, meaning expressing strong opinions, as if they were facts about them, because Russell had never seen one of them. According to the author, unicorns and salamanders never really existed. So he says that one's opinions are to be brought to the test of experience. The greatest irony of all times is that Aristotle, in spite of his reputation, is full of absurdities. He tells us the blood of females is blacker than that of males, that the pig is the only animal liable to measles, that an elephant suffering from insomnia should have his shoulders rubbed with salt, olive oil, and warm water, that women have fewer teeth than men, and so on. Nevertheless, he is considered by a great majority of philosophers a paragon of wisdom. Many matters, however, are less easily brought to the test of experience. If, like most of mankind, you have passionate convictions on many such matters, there are ways in which you can make yourself aware of your own bias. If an opinion contrary to your own makes you angry, that is a sign that you're subconsciously aware of having no good reason for thinking as you do. If someone maintains that 2 and 2 are 5, or that Iceland is on the equator, you feel pity rather than anger, unless you know so little of arithmetic or geography that his opinion shakes your own contrary conviction. The most savage controversies are those about matters as to which there is no good evidence either way. So whenever you find yourself getting angry about a difference of opinion, be on your guard. You will probably find on examination that your belief is going beyond what the evidence warrants. There are so many ways by which one can become aware of one's bias. If an opinion contrary to one's own makes him or her angry, then they must understand that they themselves are doubtful in the subconscious level. He explains the difference between arithmetic and theology. Arithmetic is about knowledge, but theology is only about opinions. Knowledge is the result of observations, but opinion need not be so. So whenever one gets angry about another person's opinion, the person should be on his or her guard and make observations to ascertain their idea. A good way of ridding yourself of certain kinds of dogmatism is to become aware of opinions held in social circles different from your own. When I was young, I lived much outside my own country in France, Germany, Italy, and the United States. I found this very profitable in diminishing the intensity of insular prejudice. If you cannot travel, seek out people with whom you disagree and read a newspaper belonging to a party that is not yours. If the people and the newspaper seem mad, perverse, and wicked, remind yourself that you seem so to them. In this opinion, both parties may be right, but they cannot both be wrong. This reflection should generate a certain caution. Now, Russell talks about dogmatism. Dogmatism means stating your opinions in a strong way and not accepting anyone else's opinions. And he also suggests ways to get rid of it as well. They are to become aware of the opinions held in social circles different from one's own. Travel is a good way of reducing the intensity of insular prejudice. Now, insular means uninterested in cultures, ideas, and people outside one's own experience. Here, Russell cites his personal experiences of traveling. When he was young, he lived much outside his own country, United Kingdom. Especially, he lived in France, Germany, Italy, and US. So if one cannot afford to travel, then they can communicate with people who have different opinions. This will help one to think from the other's perspective. Otherwise, one can read a newspaper belonging to the opposite party. If such people and newspapers seem to be mad or mean, one have to caution oneself that they will be seen in the same situation by others. Becoming aware of foreign customs, however, does not always have a beneficial effect. In the 17th century, when the Manchus conquered China, it was the custom among the Chinese for the woman to have small feet, and among the Manchus for the men to wear pigtails. Instead of each dropping their own foolish custom, they each adopted the foolish custom of the other, and the Chinese continued to wear pigtails until they shook off the dominion of the Manchus in the Revolution of 1911. Russell gives us another interesting observation, that knowing the customs of other countries will not help anyways. When the Manchus conquered China, it was the custom among the Chinese, the women to have small feet, and for the Manchus, the men to wear pigtails. Instead of these two dropping their foolish customs, each adopted the custom of the other. The Chinese continued wearing pigtails until the Manchu's dominion ended in 1911. One must, however, learn to judge and accept only what is good in other people and cultures. Blind conformity to another faith or practice will not do any good. For those who have enough psychological imagination, it is a good plan to imagine an argument with a person having a different bias. This has one advantage and only one as compared with actual conversation with opponents. This one advantage is that the method is not subject to the same limitations of time and space. Mahatma Gandhi deplored railways and steamboats and machinery. He would have liked to undo the whole of the Industrial Revolution. You may never have an opportunity of actually meeting anyone who holds this opinion. But in Western countries, most people take the advantage of modern technique for granted. But if you want to make sure that you are right in agreeing with the prevailing opinion, you will find it a good plan to test the arguments that occur to you by considering what Gandhi might have said in refutation of them. I have sometimes been led actually to change my mind as a result of this kind of imaginary dialogue. And short of this, I have frequently found myself growing less dogmatic and cocksure through realizing the possible reasonableness of a hypothetical opponent. Another method to avoid dogmatism. Now, what is dogmatism? It means that stating your opinions in a strong way and not accepting anyone else's opinions. So, another way to avoid dogmatism is to imagine arguments with a person having a different bias. The one and only advantage of the method is it is not subject to limitations of time and space. Russell says that he has changed his mind several times as a result of such kind of imaginary dialogues. Be wary of opinions that flatter your self-esteem. Both men and women, 9 times out of 10, are firmly convinced of their superior excellence of their own sex. There is abundant evidence on both sides. If you are a man, you can point out that most poets and men of science are male. If you are a woman, you can retort that so are most criminals. The question is inherently insoluble. But self-esteem conceals this from most people. We are all, whatever part of the world we come from, persuaded that our own nation is superior to all others. Seeing that each nation has its characteristic merits and demerits, we adjust our standard of values so as to make out that the merits possessed by a nation are the really important ones, while its demerits are comparatively trivial. Russell asks one to be careful in taking opinions that flatter one's self-esteem. It is very difficult to handle this problem because everybody is conscious of his or her sense of superiority. According to Russell, this should be tempered with a little modesty and reasonableness. Here again, Russell's approach is perfectly scientific and sound. Man has no reason to feel proud of himself for being the supreme product of the process of evolution. Besides, Russell points to such cruel specimens of humanity as the tyrants Nero, Hitler, and Mussolini, whose belief that man is supremely noble. Our standard of values should not be absolute because there are other people and other cultures. Their standards and systems of values are equally respectable and valued for in their lives. Here, again, the rational man will admit that the question is one to which there is no demonstrably right answer. It is more difficult to deal with the self-esteem of a man as man because we cannot argue out the matter with some non-human mind. The only way I know of dealing with this general human conceit is to remind ourselves that man is a brief episode in the life of a small planet in a little corner of the universe, and that, for aught we know, other parts of the cosmos may contain beings as superior to ourselves as we are to jellyfish. He further states that it is more difficult to deal with the self-esteem of man as man because we cannot argue out the matter with some non-human mind. The only way to solve this general human superiority is to remind about the episodic human life in a small planet. Moreover, humans should know that the other parts of the cosmos may contain lives superior to themselves. Other passions besides self-esteem are common sources of error. Of these, perhaps the most important is fear. Fear sometimes operates directly by inventing rumors of disaster in wartime or by imagining objects of terror such as ghosts. Sometimes it operates indirectly by creating belief in something comforting, such as the elixir of life, or heaven for ourselves and hell for our enemies. Fear has many forms: fear of death, fear of the dark, fear of the unknown, and that vague generalized fear that comes to those who conceal from themselves their more specific terrors. Until you have admitted your own fears to yourself and have guarded yourself by a difficult effort of will against their myth-making power, you cannot hope to think truly about many matters of great importance, especially those with which religious beliefs are concerned. Fear is the main source of superstition and one of the main sources of cruelty. To conquer fear is the beginning of wisdom in the pursuit of truth, as in the endeavor after a worthy manner of life. Fear, Russell says, is another common source of error. Imagination works negatively and harmfully when one invents certain kinds of fear, disastrous war, ghosts, or entertains illusionary games, eternal life, heaven, etc. One must learn to admit, at least to themselves, these fears. People were encouraged to believe in miracles performed by saints and in the evil brought about by wizards through their exercise of black magic. Many thousands of people were burnt at stake on a charge of practicing witchcraft. It was thought that men were punished by God for their sins through epidemics, famines, earthquakes, and floods. The belief in the supernatural is also absurd. As Russell rightly points out, the beating of a madman with the object of driving away the evil spirit is still widespread in our own country. Very little was known scientifically about the world. There are two ways of avoiding fear. One is by persuading ourselves that we are immune from disaster, and the other is by the practice of sheer courage. The latter is difficult and to everybody becomes impossible at a certain point. The former has therefore always been more popular. Primitive magic has the purpose of securing safety, either by injuring enemies or by protecting oneself by talismans, spells, or incantations. Without any essential change, belief in such ways of avoiding danger survived throughout the many centuries of civilization. Science has now lessened the belief of magic, but many people place more faith in mascots than they are willing to avow. Neither a man nor a crowd nor a nation can be trusted to act humanely or to think sanely under the influence of a great fear. And for this reason, poltroons are more prone to cruelty than brave men, and are also more prone to superstition. The doctrine professed by many modern Christians that everybody will go to heaven ought to do away with the fear of death, but in fact, this fear is too instinctive to be easily vanquished. F. W. H. Myers, whose spiritualism had converted to belief in a future life, questioned a woman who had lately lost her daughter as to what she supposed had become of her soul. The mother replied, "Oh well, I suppose she is enjoying eternal bliss, but I wish you wouldn't talk about such unpleasant subjects." Nevertheless, the dread of hell persisted, and has caused in recent times, a great softening of the dogmas as to who will be damned. In spite of all that theology can do, heaven remains to most people an unpleasant subject. When one overcomes fear, he or she becomes less superstitious and more rational. Russell gives some examples to show how magic, sorcery, and witchcraft only create illusions of freedom. One becomes really free only when they conquer fear rationally. But we have been getting too solemn. Superstitions are not always dark and cruel. Often they add to the gaiety of life. I received once a communication from the god Osiris, giving me his telephone number. He lived at that time in a suburb of Boston. Although I did not enroll myself among his worshippers, his letter gave me pleasure. I have frequently received letters from men announcing themselves as the Messiah and urging me not to omit to mention this important fact in my lectures. Superstitions about lucky and unlucky days are almost universal. In ancient times, they governed the actions of generals. Among ourselves, the prejudice against Friday and the number 13 is very active. Sailors do not like to sail on Friday, and many hotels have no 13th floor. But probably 2000 years hence, many beliefs of the wise of our day will have come to seem equally foolish. Man is a credulous animal and must believe something. in the absence of good grounds for belief, he will be satisfied with bad ones. Under the influence of great fear, almost everybody becomes superstitious. The sailors who threw Jonah overboard imagined his presence to be the cause of the storm which threatened to wreck their ship. In a similar spirit, the Japanese at the time of the Tokyo earthquake took to massacring Koreans and liberals. I admire especially a certain prophetess who lived beside a lake in the northern New York State about the year 1820. She announced to her numerous followers that she possessed the power of walking on water and that she proposed to do so at 11 o'clock on a certain morning. At the stated time, the faithful assembled in their thousands beside the lake. She spoke to them, saying, "Are you all entirely persuaded that I can walk on water?" With one voice they replied, "We are." "In that case," she announced, "there is no need for me to do so." And they all went home much edified. Perhaps the world would lose some of its interest and variety if such beliefs were wholly replaced by cold science. A wise man will enjoy the goods of which there is a plentiful supply, and of intellectual rubbish he will find an abundant diet in our own age as in every other. Even today, when we make an extensive use of the practical appliances that science has placed at our disposal, we refuse to benefit by scientific ideas. In other words, science has not yet influenced our thinking, though it has transformed our external life by providing us with such useful inventions as the railways, aeroplanes, telephones, television, and so on. In the intellectual and moral sense, we are still living in the Middle Ages, and we are still the slaves of traditional beliefs and practices, which have completely lost their meaning in the eyes of any rational individual. Russell has given us a multitude of concrete and homely examples of irrational beliefs, of or what he justly calls intellectual rubbish. All irrational beliefs are misleading, and most of them lead to persecution and cruelty, as Russell has clearly demonstrated. In this essay, Russell does not offer any metaphysical or philosophical doctrines and theories. All the ideas are such as can be understood by the ordinary reader, because all these ideas pertain to the daily life of the ordinary man, though many of the ideas are also applicable to large communities and nations. An essay such as this is of great value because it can rid many of us from the superstitions and irrational beliefs which hold a sway upon our minds and which largely determine our action. If we follow the simple rules which Russell enunciates towards the close of the essay, we can certainly make our lives more rational, more fruitful, more humane, and more meaningful. Dear students, that's all for this class. Thank you.